In the holdings of the National Archives of France, in the section dedicated to the activities of the Paris police during the Bourbon era, there is preserved a record of a search in a house on the outskirts of the Saint-Germain-des-Prés suburb, dated February 2, 1677. This document, drafted in the dry legal language of the secretary at the office of the Lieutenant General of Police, Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, records the seizure of 34 glass vials with indeterminate contents, 7 notebooks containing promissory notes from high-ranking officials, and correspondence encrypted using a simplified alchemical code. It was precisely this report, along with the testimony of the arrested Madeleine de Lagrange, that served as the starting point for the trial that in historiography has come to be known as the Affair of the Poisons. The present study aims to strip away the layers of occult legends and reconstruct the institutional logic and criminal logistics of the largest political conspiracy of the 17th century. Before we proceed to a detailed analysis of the structure of this criminal community and its methods of operation, I invite you to subscribe to our channel to support the development of documentary historical investigations based exclusively on archival primary sources. The political anatomy of France in the 1670s of the 17th century is characterized by the completion of the process of absolutizing the power of Louis XIV. After the defeat of the Fronde and the establishment of rigid control over the provincial aristocracy, the only space for social and political competition became Versailles. In this system of coordinates, proximity to the monarch's body was the primary capital, while the loss of favor meant not only political oblivion, but also financial ruin. The high concentration of ambitious representatives of the nobility in the limited space of the court created a specific market of services aimed at accelerating careers or eliminating competitors. By the mid-1670s, this demand had formed an underground institutional network consisting of fortune-tellers, alchemists, defrocked priests, and midwives, whose activities extended far beyond superstition. The social composition of the conspiracy's participants is striking in its breadth, from the marginal layers of Parisian lowlife to representatives of families such as the Montmorency, Bouillon, and Soissons. At the core of their interactions lay not a mystical community, but a strictly pragmatic system of services for managing inheritance and career advancement through the physical elimination of obstacles. The mechanics of the conspiracy functioned as a branched corporate structure with a clear division of labor. The central node of this network was Catherine Dechet, known as Voisin. According to the interrogation materials recorded in the protocols of the Chamber of Justice, her house on Rue Beaurepaire served as a logistical center where orders were distributed, financial flows accumulated, and new performers recruited. The system of information transmission within the organization was built on principles of personal surety and the use of encrypted notes, which were passed through trusted servants. The oaths sworn by clients had less a religious than a legal character of fixing complicity. A person who sought inheritance powder automatically became a hostage to the system, which precluded the possibility of denunciation. The financial records of Voisin, discovered in a hiding place behind the fireplace, testify that the cost of a full package of services, including the preparation of poisonous mixtures and the conduct of rituals to consolidate psychological dominance over the victim, could reach 5,000 livres, which in terms of modern economic indicators was equivalent to the annual budget of a small provincial town of that time. The technical implementation of the poisonings relied on the use of so-called inheritance powders. Analysis of the testimonies of the pharmacist Adam Lesage and the chemist Glaser allows us to establish the composition of the most common mixtures. They were based on arsenic, antimony, rosin, and in some cases, lead salts. The organization's supply of reagents was carried out through a network of licensed pharmacies that violated royal edicts on the control of dangerous substances for the sake of super profits. The investigation documents record 37 cases of confirmed use of poisons to terminate the existence of political opponents or wealthy relatives. The logistics of the conspirators' meetings were subject to strict rules of conspiracy. Contacts with high-ranking clients took place in closed carriages, at masquerades, or in private houses in the suburbs of Paris, such as Villeneuve-Saint-Georges. The transfer of poison was often disguised as an exchange of cosmetic products or medicinal tinctures. An important element of the system was the psychological processing of clients. The protocols mention so-called black masses, conducted by the defrocked Abbé Guibourg. However, criticism of this source, based on a comparison of testimonies obtained under torture, indicates that these rituals served the function of blood sealing. Participation in the blasphemous ceremony created an unbreakable bond between the client and the executor, guaranteeing silence on both sides. A critical audit of the structure's failure shows that the main reason for the network's exposure was the loss of control over the lower echelon of performers. In January 1679, the imprudent remarks of Marie Bosse, one of the fortune-tellers in La Voisin's circle, at a formal dinner in the presence of a police informant, led to a series of arrests. Gabriel de la Reynie employed innovative investigative methods for the time. Instead of direct accusations, he began with an analysis of the detainees' financial connections. The examination of promissory notes led the police to names that shocked even the king himself. The information leak occurred not due to betrayal within the organization's core, but because of the bureaucratic efficiency of the surveillance system created by La Reynie. However, the historian here must exercise skepticism. Many testimonies obtained during the trial in the fiery chamber, the extraordinary judicial body, were given under the influence of water torture, or fear of inevitable physical suppression. For example, the testimony of Françoise Filastre regarding the involvement of Madame de Montespan, the king's official favorite, in plans to deprive the monarch of life contains a number of logistical inconsistencies in dates and meeting locations, allowing us to hypothesize a political order from the favorite's competitors. The investigation in the fiery chamber continued from 1679 to 1682. During this time, 367 arrest warrants were issued, 442 people were detained, of whom 36 were sentenced to physical suppression, and dozens were sent to the galleys or lifelong exile. The documentary epilogue of this affair is reflected in the Royal Edict of August 31, 1682, which fundamentally changed France's legal system in the area of medicinal circulation. Henceforth, pharmacists were required to keep a book of poisons, recording the buyer's name and the purpose of acquiring any dangerous substance, and the poisons themselves had to be stored in locked cabinets. The property of La Voisin and her closest associates was confiscated in favor of the crown. The list of seized items included not only valuables, but also an extensive library of alchemical and chemical treatises, which was later partially destroyed by personal order of Louis XIV. The archives of the fiery chamber were classified, and the most compromising documents concerning the involvement of Madame de Montespan and other First Circle figures were personally burned by the king in the fireplace of his study at Versailles in 1703. Thus, the affair of the poisons became not only the largest criminal trial of the era, but also an instrument of disciplinary influence by absolutism on the aristocracy, forever altering the methods of interaction between power and secret societies in the early modern period. In analyzing the political consequences of this trial, it is important to note how exactly the institution of investigation transformed under the pressure of circumstances. Before the affair of the poisons, the Parisian police represented a fragmented network of commissioners whose powers often overlapped and conflicted. Gabriel de la Reynie, using the materials of this investigation, managed to justify the need for centralization of police power. His reports to the king, written in a dry, emotionless language, demonstrate the transition from the medieval understanding of crime against God to the modern concept of threat to state security. In this context, poisons and conspiracies were viewed not as manifestations of the devil's will, but as a defect in the system of state governance requiring administrative correction. The historian's particular attention should be focused on the financial flows within Voisin's organization. According to the registers discovered during the search, the main profit was extracted not from the direct sale of toxic substances, but from consulting services and blackmail. Clients who once sought help in resolving family or career disputes through unlawful methods fell into lifelong dependence on the syndicate. This structure resembled modern organized crime groups with hierarchical subordination and a system of common fund intended for bribing prison guards and judicial officials. In the interrogation protocols of Adam Lesage, it is mentioned that monthly payments to certain representatives of the Paris Parliament for loyalty amounted to from 200 to 500 livres. These data allow for a re-evaluation of the scale of the conspirators' influence. This was not simply a group of poisoners, but a deeply integrated, corrupt network within state institutions. The critique of sources concerning the role of Madame de Montespan requires separate commentary. Despite the fact that her name repeatedly surfaced in the testimonies of Voisin and Abbé Guibourg, there is no direct documentary evidence of her direct involvement in preparing the elimination of the monarch. Most accusations were based on circumstantial evidence, the purchase of certain aphrodisiacs, which at the time could be interpreted both as poisons and as cosmetic products. Louis XIV, understanding that a public trial of the mother of his legitimate children would inflict irreparable damage on the prestige of the dynasty, decided to terminate the active phase of the investigation regarding the highest nobility. This act of political will vividly demonstrates the priority of system stability over the principle of equality of all before the law. The institutional legacy of the affair of the poisons persisted in the diplomatic correspondence of that period. The ambassadors of England, Venice, and Spain closely followed the progress of the trial in their dispatches, interpreting it as a sign of weakness in French absolutism. However, the outcome proved to be the direct opposite. Through the purge of the court and the tightening of control over the circulation of information, Louis XIV only strengthened his power. The special services of that time, particularly La Reynie's department, gained unprecedented experience in uncovering covert cells, which was later used to suppress Huguenot resistance and Jansenist circles. In conclusion, it is worth noting the fate of the archives of this case. Although a significant portion of the documents was destroyed, the surviving interrogation records and inventory lists allow us to reconstruct the daily life and psychology of the conspiracy's participants. These were people of a transitional era who employed the tools of old magic to achieve thoroughly modern goals, the accumulation of capital and social mobility. Their defeat was predetermined by the fact that they confronted Europe's first professional bureaucratic machine of inquiry, for which an encrypted letter was merely another decoding task, and a black mass was a violation of public order in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés district. Thus, the archaeology of power in the affair of the poisons reveals not a mystical abyss, but a rational, albeit cruel, structure of the struggle for survival in the shadow of Versailles' grandeur. Subsequent studies of the trial's influence on legal culture show that it was precisely in these years that the foundations of toxicology as a forensic discipline were laid. Physicians involved in the investigation, such as Jean Remy and other members of the Sorbonne's medical faculty, began developing methods for detecting arsenic in the tissues of the deceased. Despite the imperfection of the methods of the time, the very recognition of the need for scientific expertise in court marked an important step toward evidentiary justice. The protocols mention 32 expert medical opinions, which, unlike witness testimonies, relied on visual examination of organs and the performance of rudimentary chemical tests. This was the end of an era when accusations of poisoning could be based solely on rumors or external signs of corruption. The logistics of distributing the property of the convicted also deserve attention. The archives preserve orders for auctions at which the houses, carriages, and furniture of La Voisin and her accomplices were sold. The proceeds were directed to the fund of the Paris police to finance the street lighting system, which became an ironic finale. Money earned in the shadows of conspiracies went toward making the streets of Paris brighter and safer at night. This decision by La Reynie carried a deeply symbolic character, cementing the victory of state order over the criminal underworld. For the modern researcher, the affair of the poisons remains a unique example of how a political crisis stimulates the development of state institutions. France emerged from this ordeal with a more effective apparatus of coercion and clear legislative barriers. However, the price of this stability was high. The ruined fates of hundreds of people, many of whom fell victim not to conspiracy, but to slander amid the mass hysteria that gripped the capital in those years. An analysis of contradictions in witness statements given under torture serves as a reminder of how fragile the edifice of justice is when it becomes a tool for protecting political prestige. Thus, piecing together the events from financial reports and diplomatic correspondence, we see not a Gothic drama, but a large-scale operation to ensure state security, where poisons were merely a form of political expression, and the investigation a means of finally suppressing aristocratic fronde. With this, our in-depth investigation is concluded. The facts extracted from the archives speak for themselves, needing no esoteric additions. Thank you for your attention to the details of history that shape our understanding of the mechanisms of power in the past. Within the framework of an in-depth analysis of the personalities of the key perpetrators, it is necessary to turn to the figure of Adam Lesage, whose testimony comprised more than 200 pages of handwritten text in the Bastille archives. Lesage was not merely an alchemist. He served as treasurer and liaison between the various cells of the organization. His records, seized upon arrest, contain detailed lists of purchased ingredients with prices specified in livres and sous. In Notebook 86 of the De la Reynie Fonds, it is recorded that over the period from 1674 to 1676, Lesage acquired more than 12 pounds of purified arsenic. Such a quantity of substance could not have been used in ordinary laboratory experiments, which became one of the irrefutable pieces of evidence for the preparation of mass poisonings. His role in the hierarchy was so significant that even after the dissolution of the Chambre Ardente, he remained in custody until the end of his life in 1702, as he knew too much about the financial connections between the court and the underworld. The organization's recruitment system also deserves detailed examination. Voisin preferred to hire individuals in conflict with official institutions of power, defrocked priests such as Davoust and Mariette, or women engaged in illegal medical practice. In the interrogation protocol of Davoust, dated May 15, 1679, the process of initiation is described, which was essentially a loyalty test through the commission of a crime. Each new member was offered to participate in forging documents or a minor poisoning of livestock to check their psychological resilience. This was a kind of professional certification in the world of crime. If the candidate succeeded, they gained access to more complex orders. A special place in the conspiracy's logistics was occupied by the so-called transfer points. The case materials mention 7 addresses in Paris and 3 in its environs, where clients could anonymously leave a request and pick up the finished product. One such location was the Golden Lion Inn on the road to Versailles. According to the testimony of the staff, every week unmarked carriages stopped there, from which ladies emerged under thick veils. The transfer of packages occurred through a trusted intermediary, who received a fixed fee of 3 livres for their services. This system minimized personal contacts between the organization's leadership and its clients, which for a long time made the network invulnerable to traditional surveillance methods. The political anatomy of the conspiracy would be incomplete without an analysis of the involvement of the Count de Clermont and the Duchess de Bouillon. Their implication in the affair of the poisons was long considered by historians merely the result of idle curiosity. However, financial documents indicate otherwise. The Duchess de Bouillon, through her secretary, transferred a total sum of 7,000 livres to Voisin over the course of a year. The interrogation protocols state that the purpose of these transactions was to eliminate the influence of certain royal advisors who were obstructing the appointment of her protégé to military positions. This confirms our thesis that the conspiracy served as an instrument of alternative personnel policy in the context of blocked social mobility under absolutism. An analysis of the structure's failure also requires an examination of the role of accidental betrayals. Marguerite Montvoisin, daughter of Voisin, in her testimony from 1680, described in detail the system for storing her mother's archives. She pointed to a false bottom in a jewelry box where letters from high-ranking ladies were kept. If the police had not shown thoroughness during the second search, these documents might have disappeared, and the scale of the affair would have remained local. It was precisely this discovery that made Louis XIV realize that the conspiracy permeated all levels of his administration. The seizure of these letters became a turning point, after which the investigation shifted from the category of criminal cases to that of state treason. The fate of the seized equipment is also of interest. In the cellars of Voisin's house were found distillation cubes, retorts, and furnaces that, in terms of craftsmanship, were in no way inferior to those used in the Royal Academy of Sciences. This attests to the fact that the criminal underworld was actively adapting the latest scientific achievements for its own purposes. The interrogation protocols of the chemist Glaser reveal that he advised the conspirators on enhancing the volatility of poisons, which allowed them to be used not only internally but also through inhalation of vapors or impregnation of clothing items. One such case is documented in the report on the demise of the Marquis de Castellan, whose doublet, according to the investigation, had been treated with a special composition that caused prolonged illness and subsequent death. A critical audit of Abbé Guibourg's testimonies leads us to doubt the reality of some of the rituals he described. His accounts of sacrifices, recorded in October 1680, contain clear signs of hallucinations or attempts to pass off wishful thinking as fact in order to entertain the inquisitors and delay his own elimination. Comparing his words with the testimonies of others present at the same gatherings reveals a host of contradictions in details of the interior and the number of participants. This is a classic example of how myths are born under the pressure of investigation, only to be later accepted as gospel by enthusiasts of the occult. For a serious historian, what matters more is the fact that these meetings were used to transmit operational information, with the religious veneer serving merely as a means of intimidation and control within the group. The documentary epilogue of the Poisons affair also includes an analysis of the fate of the fire chambers archives in the 19th century. When the historian François Ravesson began systematizing them, he discovered that many pages had been cut out or inked over as early as the 17th century. This indicates that even years after the trial, the authorities continued to fear exposures. Nevertheless, the surviving fragments allowed for a reconstruction of the overall picture. This was the state's first attempt to apply a systematic approach to combating organized crime. The influence of this affair on the legal system of the era is hard to overestimate. In addition to the edict on poisons, the rules for holding prisoners in the Bastille and Vincennes castle were revised, and stricter censorship of correspondence was introduced for individuals suspected of treason against the state. In concluding this overview, it must be emphasized that the Poisons affair marked the end of the era of heroic aristocratic conspiracies. After 1682, methods of political struggle in France definitively shifted to the realm of bureaucratic intrigues and backroom manipulations at Versailles, deprived of their toxic, literally, component. The state demonstrated its ability to expose any secret structures, employing the force of law and the efficiency of the police apparatus. With this, our investigation, grounded in the principles of the archaeology of power, is fully exhausted. The history of the Poisons affair is the history of the triumph of the rational state mechanism over the chaos of private interests and criminal enterprise.